I know this audience is filled with creative people because it's such a gorgeous day outside, right? And if you've chosen to be here with us, then I get that you get what the TEDx phenomena is all about. I'm here to tell you about a movement that's been emerging for the last couple of years. It's a movement that as I've joined it, I've offered it a name. It's a revolutionary movement, both in its nature and I believe it will be revolutionary in its effect. And that name is Creative Populism, which I hope is a useful name for a movement that is about how important it is that each of us and all of us be developing our creatively entrepreneurial talents and abilities. That each of us consciously cultivates the capacity within us to originate, to design, to explore and discover fresh ideas for old problems, new solutions for emerging opportunities. That each of us and all of us develop our entrepreneurial capacity to select the best ideas and develop them effectively and efficiently and gracefully to create sustainable value. There's authentic power in the founding language of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I'll bet everybody here has a historical era that you love to refer to get inspired about how common people became uncommon people, writing a revolutionary chapter about what it meant to be the people. And there's so many eras to choose from, right? There's the obvious Italian Renaissance that was, after all, led by bastards and stonecutters' sons. There's the post-World War II Japanese economic miracle, and may we wish them another such miracle. There's the American Civil Rights Movement, where so much right was restored rightfully to people, where so much hatred was drained from our country, where we became a better country, where so many other people were inspired to go pursue the creation of their own rights. So this revolutionary movement that I've called creative populism that is emerging, I believe is inevitable. And I believe it's inevitable for three reasons. It's inevitable because it's necessary, it's inevitable because it's logical, and it's inevitable because it's optimistic, and oh, by the way, I think it's wildly optimistic. It's necessary because on the one hand, our economy hasn't recovered because it can't recover. It needs to be refreshed, it needs to be reborn, it needs to be rebuilt. And on the other hand, we the people in our nation face such extraordinary societal challenges that most people assume that paradigm-shifting insight is going to be required to help us grapple with those big challenges. So we need waves of creatively entrepreneurial people washing over our businesses, not just with big, bold ideas, but people who know how to execute creatively in the inches and the minutes so that we can create 100 victories every day in our organizations. And we need a creatively entrepreneurial citizenry because in the wake of these paradigm-shifting changes that we're going to have to grapple with to solve these societal ills, we need a creatively entrepreneurial citizenry who can create advantage for themselves, for their families, and for their communities in the wake of these amazing paradigm-shifting changes that are going to occur. So the creative populist movement is emerging. As I've offered creative populism a name, or excuse me, this revolutionary movement, the name of creative populism, I've also offered a framework of principles and practices. And if it's going to be a truly populist framework, it has to be both elementary, both in the sense of how Sherlock Holmes would refer to something being elementary. To Doc Watson, it was self-evident, right? But also elementary in the sense that it's basic, so it's available to all of us. And such a framework also needs to be flexible because while creativity is so very, very common, and isn't it all the more wonderful that it's so very, very common, this framework also needs to be flexible because while creativity is common, we all have our own unique variety, our own unique brand, and so we need a framework that's flexible that you can turn it into your own framework. And so here's three big ideas that I offer as a framework for being a creative populist, for being creatively entrepreneurial, for intentionally developing your creative qualities. The three concept areas are a creatively entrepreneurial attitude, a creatively entrepreneurial technology, and a creatively entrepreneurial science. I've mentioned the creatively entrepreneurial attitude already a couple of times. It's intentionality. It's an ancient wisdom. All the great faiths understood it, that the pilgrims and the novices that are joining that great faith need to stand and declare that from this moment forward, here's who I am. Because they understood that in that moment of declaration, your world changes. You become a different person and you begin to see the world differently, and of course a creative person has to see the world differently. So it's important to make that bold declaration that I am a creatively entrepreneurial person. In that declaration, we should also include a discipline or a practice. The framework that we've developed in my classes over the years here at Duke about how to be a creatively entrepreneurial person, how to practice that intentionality, has focused in on 4 different behaviors, 4 different creatively entrepreneurial behaviors: being generous, being humble, being playful, and enthusiastically pursuing beauty. Each one of these attributes has its own strategic value. For instance, you can never expect a marketplace to be more generous with you than you are with a marketplace. Or for instance, when it comes to humility, it shouldn't be about being right. It should be about thinking about emerging truths. When it comes to being playful, when we're generating creative ideas, if we have a playful attitude, well, what that means is that we're not going to grab a hold of the very first idea, right? We're having fun. So let's keep working at developing ideas, and let's see what continues to emerge as we continue to bring a playful attitude to idea generation. And in terms of enthusiastically searching for beauty, well, we need to, as creative people, be conscious of the importance of refreshing ourselves, restoring our creative soul. So when we find beauty, let's stand in its presence in awe and appreciation and allow that refreshing moment to occur. But then before we walk away, let's be conscious for just a second and let's evaluate where that beauty comes from, because of course it comes so very much from patterns. Patterns of color, patterns of texture, patterns of form, patterns of harmony, and we want to be understanding patterns better as a creatively entrepreneurial person. So those 4 creatively entrepreneurial behaviors, I think, serve a creatively entrepreneurial soul, a creatively entrepreneurial spirit. But what's also really very interesting is I can't imagine that I can be in anything other than a really good mood if I'm practicing those behaviors of generosity, playfulness, the rest of the others. And research shows that when you are in a good mood, your peripheral vision expands. And so you literally see more of the world. You see more opportunity with this expanding view of the world. Other places to practice intentionality is in the language that you use. I've asked my students this for a number of years now. Raise your hand if you'd like to be taken advantage of. I've yet to have anybody raise their hand. So then we have to wonder, well, why do we want to take advantage of an opportunity? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take the best and leave the rest, but it certainly can mean that, right? It certainly can mean that. What if instead we say we're going to create advantage? Be mindful of the language that we use, because it can point us in a certain direction, and in this case, the direction that creating advantage from this opportunity points us to is an appreciation that maybe I need to nurture this. Maybe I need to cultivate this opportunity, right? Maybe I need to invest in it and watch it grow. So there's a place. One of my students fairly recently have said, well, here's another place where language is interesting. Why do we insist that America is a developed country? Don't we want to be a developing country? So be careful about the language that we use. So the creatively entrepreneurial attitude is intentionality. A creatively entrepreneurial technology is story. And I believe it's useful to see story as a technology. It's one of our oldest technologies. It's one that we've been using for 50,000 years as we've sat around fires telling each other the most wonderful stories about the most wonderful human condition that we can imagine, telling each other stories about how we aspire to be that version of humanity. We've used story to humanize ourselves. And then along the way, we discovered that story is this wonderful piece of software that not only organizes information, but attaches meaning and significance to that information and motivates activity, inspires action associated with that information and that meaning. So when we learned that story served us so well, we became expert storytellers. We're all expert storytellers. I could talk to you all for an hour about story, and you would be saying to yourself, well, I knew that. It's a wonderfully creative, populist, creative platform for us to be sharing, because over the years, it's shaped our brains. It's affected us in significant ways. The creatively entrepreneurial science is complexity. It's a relatively new science. It's a science that's emerged in the last 20 or 30 years. It's a science of thinking more than it is a science of knowing. It's a science of trying to understand how order, how patterns emerge out of when so much in the universe is about entropy and about things dissipating. Why does life occur? Why do independent units find relationship with each other and emerge in these extraordinarily exciting dynamic patterns? That's the science of complexity. I would tell you a little bit more about the science of complexity, but there's a wonderful presentation coming up immediately after mine that will be focusing specifically on complexity. My proposition to you is that by studying the science of complexity, by consciously studying the science of complexity, you improve your subconscious ability to understand patterns, see patterns where they're emerging, deal with ambiguity. That's an important aspect of complexity. So my request of you, a group of people who have gathered here, who I think probably say to yourselves, I have joined this movement, I am a part of this creative movement. My request of you is one to appreciate, if we're going to change our economy into a creative economy, here's another reason why creative populism is so wildly optimistic, is that changing jobs into creative jobs is an incremental process. Right? So we can begin it today. We can begin it right now. We can, when we go back into the workplace on Monday, we can take a job and we can help an administrative assistant no longer see himself or herself as an administrative assistant, but maybe as a partner in the effort that I'm doing. I won't just assign work to somebody, but I'll tell somebody where it is we want to go with this piece of work and give them an opportunity to bring their creative spirit and their creative nature into the definition and the completion of that work. So thank you very much for joining us. We got a bunch of great speakers coming up behind me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.